Good evening. It's great to be here at Deerfoot, and I have a long history with this congregation now, visiting, giving reports, but even before that, working as a youth minister at Asheville Road, visiting with this congregation. So it's always a joy to be with you all, and once again, to be here under other circumstances as I present this new work and give a context behind it. And it was, again, a great joy for me to just come in this evening and to see familiar faces. And with us having worked in Peru for over 9 years and me sharing reports in Cusco, what all happened there, and our adventures in Cusco, and even the strange things that we ate. I forgot about sharing that with you guys at least one time. And I walked in this evening and someone came up to me and said, "You're the one that eats guinea pig." And I had to correct her just a little bit. Apparently her son talks about this, but I said, that was a special occasion. I don't just chow down on guinea pig sandwiches and just look for guinea pig, but I enjoyed hearing that because that meant that at least that part was memorable as far as what I report and talk about. I hope tonight is memorable and inspirational and something exciting that you get to hear about when you think about what we're doing now. Let me give a little bit of context before I begin. Our family returned from Peru in January 2019, and so just last year, and that was a very difficult time for us in re-entry. We went through a lot of different just obstacles and coming back and losing that experience that we had over there. And then in addition to that, leaving behind all of our friends and what had become family to us in so many ways. And so we're still working through that and we'll continue to work through that. But we served with our overseeing church, Chase Park in Huntsville, and did that for several months, and that was really enjoyable, and also made those adjustments and kind of regrouped. And we also had with us our teammates that worked with us over 9 years in Cusco, Gary and Jennifer Reeves. They returned and served with their overseeing church. And then we reunited in June of last year and began to get settled in June and got the kids in school. The kids are now in bilingual schools. The public school system provides a dual language program, so that was a nice transition to move from Spanish in school to Spanish in school here, so they're able to do those things as well. So all of that set us up to be able to get to work, and that's where I want to pick up this evening, is to explain to you what's been done so far since our time after arriving there in June and then getting really settled in July. And then I want to talk about some good news about what has happened recently, and then I'll close by discussing what will be done in the future. I want to set us up this evening by sharing this thought and challenging our idea with this following thought. It's essential to be able to frame a problem correctly. It is an essential thing to be able to approach a problem with the right mindset and understand what it really is. An example of this would be the first century church in the book of Acts. We find that during that time, the church was at a crossroads. There were several things coming to the surface all at the same time. And because of that, the church had to approach it carefully and really understand what was going on. You can look through the book of Acts in the first part there. We'll look at chapter 15 in just a moment. But you probably already know, many of you have probably already taught in Bible class, this idea of the first century church and what all was going on. And as the church was growing, an opposition was growing at the same time. And this opposition took shape in the form of what we call today Judaizers. And they were following around Paul and his companions as they worked among the non-Jews, the Gentiles. And anytime Paul established a new work and was encouraging the brethren, he would pull back and go to another place. The Judaizers would follow him and insist to the new converts that they first pass through Judaism. And it became very violent and just chaotic with the crisis that the Judaizers were making in the first century church. Things escalated. So they were in conflict. The opposition formed. Racism, discrimination began to grow. Paul began writing letters to these Gentile churches using very strong language, trying to expose the Judaizers for who they really were. All these things were going on when finally there was a decisive council in the city of Jerusalem. So everyone was summoned to Jerusalem. Paul and Barnabas are there with the others. Men stood up like Peter and were saying very important and clarifying things to help orient the church during this trying time. And finally, James, the brother of Jesus, stood up and shared this with the church. We should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God. Following that, the leaders wrote a letter with the intention of sending it, circulating it to the Gentile nations. They did that, and it was passed along to these new churches, prohibiting them from practicing some pagan traditions, but also encouraging them. Other translations say in verse 19, we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles to enter into the church. That began a new movement of unity. Paul, with more confidence, went out to a second missionary journey and then a third. Others were doing great things. The church began to grow. It was a global expansion. It reached all nations, but then beyond that, it continued to grow. It truly was a movement, and we're here today because of this decisive moment. Think about what could have happened in that story. But the right thing happened. Because, and this is the point I want to get across as we think about it, what appeared to be a problem was actually the church's greatest asset. The Gentiles, many did not know what to do with this, but Paul understood this is an opportunity for the gospel. This is an opportunity for more growth and more evangelism. Thinking on that, today, in the year 2020, we often have difficulty in understanding what are the problems, clarifying the real obstacles that we have in the church today. Albert Einstein once said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the solution and 5 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. That's the opposite of me. Usually I come to a problem, I've got about 100 solutions and I haven't even studied it yet. I don't know if you're like that. But the tendency we have sometimes is to not even approach the problem, but begin throwing solutions at it. So this evening, we're not going to, obviously this is a presentation about Charlotte, but we're not going to have time to diagnose different problems and issues in the church today, but I'm using this introduction as a platform to be able to understand better why it is why we have begun the work in Charlotte. There are many great things happening currently in the church today. There are great Christian universities. There are good events for young people. There are servants that are serving in different parts of the world. The church is growing. We should celebrate that. We should focus on those things and have always a spirit of optimism. But at the same time, we know that in certain parts of the world and in certain parts of our country, we are facing unique obstacles. There's an author, I don't know, but he's with the Churches of Christ, and he has a book called New Day, David M. Young, and he gives the following statistic about the Churches of Christ in America. American Churches of Christ have lost 200 people every week for more than 10 years running. For the last 10 years, every week in America, he puts it this way, a Church of Christ goes out of business and closes its doors forever. But what Young cites here, he's alluding to the fact that in some places, and especially in the U.S. and certain areas, the church is in decline. But he actually gives us a consequence, doesn't he? He doesn't really give us a problem source. This is something that we don't necessarily need to dwell on and allow it to drag us down, because we should be optimistic about what God does with His church. But at the same time, we should understand it's a consequence of something going on in the church today. In fact, there's different issues. We could certainly point to the extremes that always present themselves, whether it's theological liberalism or traditionalism. Some of those things, the extremes, are attacking the church at times. But I want to focus on another issue that has become a problem, and it's the following. The church was once highly committed to the practice of church planting in the U.S. And maybe the problem is, one problem is, we don't church plant as much as we used to. The church was once growing, and now it's not in the U.S., especially in some areas. Maybe we need to plant more churches. Maybe we need to look into the fact that our country is a mission field, and we should treat it as such. And so, turning away from the problem, that certainly deserves a lot more conversation and study. But because of the time, I want to get into some opportunities that we can have in our own country and thinking about what needs to be done. So we'll discern an opportunity as we think about this. One thing we can say is we're sending missionaries into all the world, and we should be doing that more and more, but we should take note that the whole world is coming to us at the same time. And this is an opportunity for us as we think about how our country is being reshaped with each passing year. Consider the statistics that I have up here now. I think you can see those, should be able to see those. But this is from Pew Research Center, and it tracks the population growth in the U.S. among Hispanics. It begins in 1960, and it projects for the year 2065. In 1960, just talking about Hispanics, it says that the population numbered about 6.3 million and made up, percentage-wise, 3.5%. You could follow it down, but if you look at the second to last line, the year 2015 was the most recent year represented on this chart. It says that there were 56.5 million Hispanics, making up a population, a percentage of 17.6%. 1 in every 6 were Hispanic. It's looking at 2065 at the bottom line, and is projecting that there will be 107 million Hispanics, with a percentage of the population making up 24%. Almost 1 in every 4 will be Hispanic. This is a very complex discussion right now in our country, and there are different ways we could take this and different conversations that we can have. But our takeaway this evening, I want it to be that this is the fastest growing population in the U.S. and one of the most receptive in the U.S. What I'm asking this evening is, what are we doing to address this great opportunity? What are we doing to take advantage of it? I think if we're passive now, we'll regret not being more proactive in the future. And so thinking about these numbers, thinking about the opportunity and how our country is being reshaped every day, I want to look at a plan and propose a plan of how we can take advantage of this opportunity. Our team, again, with the 2 couples, we did a survey trip at the beginning of 2018 as we were preparing for re-entry and thinking about what we needed to be doing. And we looked at the experience we had. I liked how Richard put it earlier. The experience we had in Cusco and working together, these 2 families, for almost a decade, and the language acquisition that we made, and just the cultural understanding and the skills of church planting. And we decided it would be in our best interest, and we feel like we could give more to the kingdom if we continue to work together and use these skills to church plant in the States as well. And so thinking about that, we surveyed the U.S. We went to different places in the West, also in Florida and the South, and we also went to Charlotte. We found that Charlotte would be a great place to plant churches. And we found the following information as well. Charlotte is a metro area of 2.5 million, and it's estimated that there are 600,000 Hispanic residents in that number. For me, that was amazing because in Cusco, there were 400,000. And I always thought about a city of 500,000, and here's a city, or here's a population within a metro area of 600,000. There's so much work that needs to be done in the area of Charlotte. I could talk more about the city itself and what has been done working among the Hispanics there and how much effort we lack and development, not only in that area, but in the other areas we surveyed, in all the metro areas in the U.S. There's so much more that we could do if we could be more intentional and plan better with our strategy in reaching the Hispanics. But I want to mention 3 recent developments, and then I'll talk about the gospel as we conclude our presentation this evening. First, we understood that teaching the gospel will be the greatest blessing we can give. However, at the same time, we must also serve the community by helping to meet their felt needs. We know that communities have felt needs. These are issues about which we talk about and have concerns about things we pray for. And so if that community has these issues, we need to be reaching out to them and seeing how we can serve. That opens up conversations and a door about the gospel too. And so we began to discuss this and reach out and try to understand the community better. We did an online poll through Facebook among Spanish speakers only in the Charlotte area and found that in response to the question, what is the greatest need among Latinos in your area, 40% responded with the challenge to learn English. And 40%, as far as responses go, is the largest percentage of the answers given. And I know teaching English as a ministry is kind of cliche, but if it's done right with much investment, there can be a lot of great return on that investment. In fact, we've been really busy with our contacts using the Bible to teach English. We work several nights a week, 3 or 4 nights a week. Both my teammate and I, he works with one group and I work with another. We work one-on-one as well as we do one-on-one Bible studies. But in response, we began to offer ESL, English as a Second Language classes, while using the Bible story as material. And we genuinely want to help them in their English. But at the same time, we want to serve them spiritually by teaching them the Bible. And this has been a great way to serve the community. We also offer opportunities for those Spanish speakers who want to become biblically literate. So we've reached out with a one-on-one course, evangelistic course, to teach the Bible and tell them you can know the Bible. And we've been able to meet many people and generate many contacts just by sitting down and teaching the Bible one-on-one in Spanish. Marriage also is an important goal in the Hispanic community, but many don't have access to the support they need to enrich their marriage. So my teammate and I, we became trained. We were trained in material that enriches marriages by using the Bible. We're now able to use those materials in Spanish. And so we're reaching out to couples who are Spanish-speaking, trying to help them enrich their marriage using the Bible. That's another way we're trying to serve the community. Because of the steps we've taken in just the last several months in our approach, we're now beginning one-on-one evangelistic studies, even with those who we've reached out in different avenues. And so more and more students are coming to these one-on-one studies. Also, I currently have an average of 60 students weekly. These students are in different groups. Many of them are one-on-one. Some of them are maybe in a 30-member class, ESL class, teaching English. My teammate Gary, he has a whole other set of students that he reaches out to. These are students that we've developed and generated just since October of 2019, the last 2 or 3 months. And these are established students. We've been in their home, they've been in our homes, we go out to eat together. I've eaten all kinds of ethnic foods from all over Latin America just because I want to be with these students. We're developing friendships, a rapport, and together there are many new contacts among whom we can serve, study the Bible with, invite to worship, and we're forming community with these newcomers to the city. One of my students recently shared with me, one of my one-on-one studies, we've become good friends, and he recently shared with me that our study and our conversation, which usually turns into a couple of hours, is the only opportunity he has during the whole week to sit down and talk to somebody. He's from Puerto Rico. He's an American citizen, but at the same time, his home is on the island in Puerto Rico. He's a newcomer to the city. He doesn't have community. He's in free fall. He doesn't have friends or family there. And so sitting down with me and just in conversation is one of the highlights of his week. He told me, a lot of times I just go to the mall. He said, I don't like going to the mall, but I go to the mall just to walk around and be with other people. Loneliness is a real issue with many people. And I believe the church, regardless of where it is, can be a resource for people, a community for people as we reach out to them and meet their needs, but also provide for them Christian community. And they can respond to wanting to hear the gospel and study the Bible with us. So this has been something that we've invested in greatly in the last several months, in the last part of 2019. Second, our first several months were full of the activity of getting to know the community, but also we decided that we needed to plan vision and strategy. We said, just like we did in Cusco, before we jump into things, before things get chaotic and we become overwhelmed with ministry and evangelism and discipleship and forming leadership, before all of that, we need to sit down and think about what it is that needs to get done in Charlotte. We spent many hours doing this, many hours of prayer, and also trying to think critically through things, comparing things to Cusco and thinking about Charlotte now. And so our goal now is to help to establish 3 church plants over the course of the next 15 years. Each group will be bilingual and multi-ethnic. We want to be able to reach the 2nd and 3rd generation of the Hispanic family and not just the immigrant generation or perhaps the Spanish-dominant generation. And so we have developed relationships with congregations in the Charlotte area. There are some good congregations that are fairly small in the area that have a heart to reach out to the Hispanic community. We're starting with just a church plant, independent of others. We're trying to learn how to do it, but we feel like for the 2nd and 3rd that we can partner with other congregations and that we can help them plant a congregation. We feel very strongly about empowering the local church to plant more churches. We feel like this is something that a service and a way that we can help area congregations. Before going to Cusco, we talked a lot about why we were going several years ago, maybe 12 years ago now. We discussed that. I remember being with my Spanish teacher about 9 years ago and her asking me, why did you come to Cusco? There are so many churches here in the city. Why are you here in Cusco? And that was really challenging for me to think about, why are we in Cusco? And I knew the answer, but it was hard to articulate it. And I think understanding why we're doing something is important because church planting's hard, crossing cultures is hard, establishing something new is hard. And so we need to understand why, so that during those hard times, we're motivated to keep on doing what we need to be doing. So we answered this question, and I want to share it with you as well. What's our purpose? Why are we in Charlotte? We are living and serving in the Charlotte Metroplex because we know there are hundreds of thousands within the Hispanic population who are living without hope, who are trapped because of sin, and who desperately need God's redemptive act of salvation. We believe a message to restore New Testament Christianity is needed in order to bring this community into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's our answer. This is why we're doing this. And I wanted to share that with you as a partnering congregation in these church plants. Number 3, Richard mentioned this earlier, and I want to close with a recent development. We had our first worship service Sunday, January 26th, so just a couple of Sundays ago. We're still currently making arrangements for a meeting place for the church, and we have several good options for that. We don't have a building. We don't plan on having a building that is just ours like we did in Cusco, but there are many great ways that we can meet together on a Sunday in the Charlotte area. Over the course of the week before, we invited many of our contacts. I like to look back and see how it looks up there. There's a picture of the first worship service. Well, we invited some of the contacts, a few of them, to meet in my teammate's home, Gary and Jennifer Reeves. We met in their basement and had a worship service. We only invited about 20% of our contacts just because we lacked space. We couldn't fit everyone in there at the same time, and so we're looking for a place to rent on Sundays so that we don't have that problem. The lesson delivered that morning was on forming a Christian community and taking a look at how Jesus began His ministry and how He called the apostles and began to form, through His commandments and through His new movement, a Christian community. And so we related that to what we were doing currently at that time, and that was received very well. We had 30 in worship attendance just on that one Sunday, just inviting a few of the contacts. And after the worship, we had a period of prayer where we listened to prayer requests, and Gary led a prayer for one group, I led a prayer for another, and we wanted to be able to pray with the people as well. And one lady shared the fact that she was a newcomer to Charlotte, but she had worshiped in a few places and just never felt comfortable, never felt like she belonged to those places. But she said that Sunday she felt like she was a part of something. She felt like she was a part of a group. There were hugs, there were prayers for her, there were conversations. People actually stopped and we talked afterwards for a good while, and she was very excited, along with the others who were attending that evening, about the upcoming church plant. The visitors, they're now inviting their friends and family and helping us to prepare for the next worship service. So the missionaries were worshiping every Sunday in different congregations, but this was one worship service in January. We'll have our next one in 2 Sundays. Now they're inviting their friends and family, and then we'll have one more in March. We're preparing an inauguration for a Sunday in April. And on that Sunday, we'll begin meeting weekly, obviously, and begin studying the Bible one-on-one with individuals and baptizing them, and they'll become members of the church plant there in Charlotte. I want to close with this thought. Newcomers, there's another picture. You want to see that. Newcomers to the city will always need help. I believe that. I believe that some of the most receptive people to the gospel are newcomers. We believe that this is an opportunity for us to serve and for the gospel to liberate. We believe that people are receptive. We just need to reach out and help them understand the gospel. Perhaps what did not resonate with them in their home country, wherever they were previously, as they were in their day-to-day routine, as they were trying to climb society and be on top, whatever didn't resonate with them there, now being in a new place, in different circumstances, trying to understand a new world, maybe perhaps now they're more receptive. And we believe that there is much receptivity in Charlotte. I recently heard a story about an engineer who, I'm going to step away from the mic. I think you can still hear me. Okay. I recently learned a story about an engineer who was working to solve the issue of the lack of drinking water in places like India and Africa. His name is Peter Janicki. And he had an interesting story and interesting way in how he approached problems. We mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation this evening. And he understood that you couldn't just throw out solutions like had been done in those areas with drinking water previously, that you really had to think about it. The way we treat our water here in the U.S. is much different than the way they can in other places just because of the lack of money. And so Bill and Melinda Gates approached him with their foundation and their resources and gave him the task as an engineer to discover how they could provide drinking water. He thought about it, studied it, did a lot of research, and finally came up with a mechanism that was successful in treating the drinking water in these places so that they could have better water. And that was a huge win for everybody. That was done, unfortunately, outside the church, but at the same time, that benefited the community. But what I want to share with you is actually what he said as he was being interviewed about the whole process and about developing this mechanism to treat the drinking water. He said the following: "Today, all of the simple problems have already been solved. We're just left with all of the complex ones." Some of you laugh because maybe you have that experience or that same frustration. It feels like that sometimes. It feels like all the simple ones have already been solved. Now we just have these complex problems that just keep coming back around over and over and over again that have no solution. Again, this is from a secular viewpoint because the Christian knows, because of the Bible, that the most complex problem man has ever faced, has ever struggled with, has already been solved. That problem that we struggled with for thousands of years, that another religious system tried to just cover up, that Jesus came, lived and walked among us, that taught us a better way, and eventually died on the cross but conquered death through the resurrection. And that problem was the most complex we had and we will ever have. The problem of ourselves, this problem of sin. Paul puts it in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. In verse 6, he says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time, Christ died for the ungodly." This is the message we share in Charlotte. This is the message still being shared in Cusco. That church is doing well. They have obstacles, but they're doing great. They're preaching this message as well. This is the message you share here at Deerfoot, I'm sure, every time you meet together. But this is what we can offer the world, and it's Jesus offering it through His church, and it's a great message that must be proclaimed. And this evening, we offer it once again, make it known publicly that your greatest problem can be solved through the death and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. If you have a need this evening, we invite you to come forward right now as we stand and sing.